Let's keep going with our state tree based dialogue system. So last time we set up a bunch of building blocks, making our dialogue box, our dialogue display, a quick little speaker, blueprint, and our initial state tree setup where everything is going to come together and actually be usable. But so far, we only have one automatically playing line of dialogue, and that's kind of everything that we do have. So today I want to do two things. I want to make this only work on interaction, which is going to be relatively easy to do. And then I want to make something that allows me to have multiple lines of dialogue easily following each other up until we make a choice. The choice is going to be probably something that we program in the next video, just have a dedicated video to just that. But I want to set up the system that allows us to have multiple lines of dialogue back to back to back. But first, let's make this thing only work on interaction. So for that, I'm just going to build the most simple interaction system that you could possibly think of. So we're going to make a blueprint interface. We'll have BPI interaction, open that up. In the new function we're going to be creating will be interact. It's going to take an input of an interacting actor. In this case, that's not actually something that we're going to be using, but that's just like good practice to be able to send through if you need it. And then as an output, we'll send back whether or not the successful interaction happened. So successful interaction. Let's go into our BP speaker and add in its class settings, the new interface for BPI interaction. And here we now have our new interface function for interact. I'm going to set that to being true. And when we get interacted with, we pull in our state tree component and we simply start logic. Now that also does mean that we want to not start the logic automatically anymore, because we only want to start it when we actually like interact with this thing. But that's about all there is to it. So let's go into our third person character. Again, we just need to set this up like super quick. I'm going to set up a debug key for F. We'll get sphere overlap. I'm going to make an array for the object types. That'll be world static, that'll be born, and that'll be world dynamic. That's pretty much all the actors that we're ever going to need. The sphere position will be the get actor location. And the sphere radius, let's say that everything within like 250 units will be available for us. Then we do a for each loop with break. And we just try to interact with everything. Interacting actor is just going to be self, do that in the loop body. And after every one, we check, hey, was that a successful interaction? Because if it was, we're going to break out of the loop so that we only interact with one thing at a time. So this is the most basic interaction system in the world. But now that we have that, we can walk up to this thing, press F, and it will display the dialogue. So it won't get rid of it because we have no way of ending our dialogue tree, but that's what we're going to be working on right now. So the way that we're going to set this up is with data tables. So let's make a data table for an example here. So we can just search for data table, which is going to be this one over here. And we can pick a struct that it's going to be using. We made a dialog struct in the last video because I knew I was going to be using data tables. Essentially, you could also just make an array of dialogues and populate that entirely within the state tree itself. That's going to be a little bit messy as you scale up, I would argue. So having this in a data table is probably just a little bit easier to work with. So we're going to make that, call that DT dialog 1. And now we can start adding rows here. We're not going to be using the row name, really. You can just add as many as you want. And here we add in a face. So let's say again, we use this green one. And the way we have it set up, we don't actually need to supply in the green one again and again because it's checking, hey, do we send through a valid face to begin with? If we don't, just keep the one that we already had. And then we can start supplying names. So I think we called him like Facey McFaceface, right? Now, if you really wanted to, you could do the same thing with the names. The texts are always going to, of course, be related. But if you really wanted to like make this very user-friendly, you could go into your dialog box. I'm just like thinking about this right now. You could get the name. You could get the length if you turn it into a string, so toString. You can get the length, and you just check whether or not that length is greater than 0. So we set the name here. We just check, hey, are we trying to set it to a string with a length of greater than 0? If so, we set it. If not, we just pass it up. And this way you only have to fill out the name once as well. Do bear in mind that if you're using text and you're using something like translation tables, this might end up confusing you a little, because if there's somewhere in a translation table that you didn't translate the name properly, your entire dialogue system might kind of like collapse in on itself. So do be careful about that. But I think, didn't I type Facey McFace here? Now it will just keep this name until we provide in a new next name, which is nice. The text will be, I have a face. And then the sound will be whatever, right? So we can just dockable window open, do this one. And then the next one, we only really need to put in the text. So do you have a face with a different sound? Maybe, I don't know, just enter play. And then the last one, faces are nice. With, again, a random sound. You would, of course, record this as dialogue and whatever, but we're just going to set this to being like fire. Sure, why not? Actually, let's do fire first, so that we can see that it interrupts when we go to the next one. So this one will instead just be the camera shutter, why not? So we now have our dialogue table for our first dialogue interaction. Now we just need to build a system that takes this one row at a time and displays it in our dialogue display widget. So let's get into that. We already have our dialog box open, so let's start building some more functionality. I'm going to make a new custom event and call that run dialog table. And we're not going to do too much with that at the moment, because we're going to just make immediately another custom event as well, which will be start new dialog. And you'll see why we set these up separately in a moment, but run dialog table will just run the start new dialog, and start new dialog is going to take in an input of a data table. So data table, and call that dialog table. Now, the one downside to this is if you have a bunch of other types of data tables in your project as well, that might like mess these things up a little bit. We'll build on some protection to make sure that the data table that we're using actually uses dialog structs. But an alternative way to deal with this might be to use data assets and make a specific dialog asset type that just has like an array of dialogues. That way, when you get the drop-down menu, you only get dialog assets, which might be a little bit nicer. I just want to use data tables to keep things a little simpler and a little cleaner for now. There's a bunch of ways to put together a bunch of lines, is kind of what I'm getting at. So if you want to change up a little bit here, because it may suit your situation better, feel free to. Either way, when we set a new dialog, what we want to do is we want to promote this new data table to a variable. And then we want to also set a variable here for the index that we're going to be working with, and that will be an integer, because we need to keep track of how far along we are in the data table, of course. And anytime we start a new dialog, we want to set that back to 0. Then we want to make another custom event again. We're almost done with the custom events, I promise you. I make a new custom event, and we're going to call this progress dialog. And I'm going to take the thing that we made up here, which is in set new dialog, we had this last sound stop playing it if it exists. We're actually going to take that from set new dialog, and we're going to set that up in progress dialog instead. It's kind of alright to keep it where it was, but I like having it in here for like the way that it progresses through the code. But next up, we want to make not a new custom event. No. We're done with custom events. We're going to instead be making a function. So let's make a function, which will be get next dialog. And that's going to have a couple of outputs. Of course, that's going to have a dialog output, the struct that we made. So let's call that dialog. But it's also going to have an output for whether or not it found any dialog to begin with. So that's going to be a bool, and we'll call that something along the lines of found dialog. So we'll take our dialog table, and first and foremost, we turn this into a validated get. And if this is not a valid value at all, obviously we immediately return with found dialog being false, because we're trying to get dialog out of a table that doesn't exist. But then we actually use this dialog table, and we get the data table row struct. That gets you a reference to the object for your blueprint struct. So you can check whether or not that is equal dialog structure that we made over here and put that into a branch node as well. So if that is the same, that means that we're using a data table that uses dialog structs, which is what we want. If we're for some reason providing in a different type of data table, we just return false as well, because we don't want to progress in that case. If that is true as well, though, we want to get the data table rows. So we get data table row names. You need to get them by the names, and then you can get a specific row from this array that gets output here. So we get a copy from whatever index we are currently on, and then we use the data table itself again to now get row, just get data table row, and that takes in a name. Again, if the row was not found, we return with found dialog being false, but if the row was found, we finally connect the out row into the dialog. We say, hey, we found some dialog, and we can move on. So this is the entire get next dialog function that we're going to be using. After we stop playing the dialog, we get next dialog, and we check, hey, did we find the next dialog, yes or no? If we didn't find it, that means that whatever dialog we're going through has now finished. So we're going to broadcast that to whatever is listening to it. So make an event dispatcher called dialog finished and drag that in, call it out on false for this branch. However, if we did find anything, we use the one custom event that we already had, is the set new dialog. So set new dialog, and we connect up the dialog to this input. And then we also take our index, because we've now updated our dialog. So next time we go through this, we need to have a new next index. So we just pull up that and increment integer. And now we can start working backwards. So when we start a new dialog, we take in a dialog table, set that to our new value. We set our index back to 0, and then we just start by progressing the dialog through its first iteration. And then run dialog table is simply going to only start up that new dialog. And of course, needs to be given in the dialog reference. You can, if you really want to, get rid of this event and just call this one directly. The reason that we do it this way is because this way you can technically put this on protected or private, so that other classes can't access it and only access this one, which is a little bit more descriptive and a little bit more clear as to what it actually does. But we're not going to bother too much with that for now. So with that all set up, let's move back to using that in our dialog display, the thing that holds the dialog box that we've just been working on. Because, of course, this thing is going to need to send through the information to the dialog box that it's going to need to display new dialog. So let's make a new custom event here and call that run dialog table. That's going to take in our dialog box that we have, and we start new dialog. And of course, we just pull through the reference to the table that we're going to be using. And now we need to dynamically add a button to progress to the next text, because we didn't have that here. And in some cases, we need to specifically not have that as well, because if it is a dialog that offers you a choice, you just don't want to be able to press next. Your button should display the potential choices that you can make. So we need to dynamically add and remove this as it becomes relevant. So let's make a custom button that can do that. So we make a new user interface, blueprint widget, user widget, call that WBP custom button. This one's going to be remarkably simple. We just put in a button, and then within that button, we're going to have a little bit of text. Make sure that the text is a variable. I like setting my widgets to using desired size so that they're a little bit better sized. I like also to make the text black. And then in the event graph, all that we really need to do is we need to add in the text, which is going to be a text variable, make it instance editable, and expose it on spawn. And then also add in an index. This is the reason that we're making a custom button, because these buttons are going to be given indexes. Specifically, that is relevant for when we have multiple buttons, for when we have dialog choice. Right now, that's not super relevant, but we just want to set this up to be easily implementable later down the line. So give this an integer for an index, which is also going to be instance editable and exposed on spawn. Then on construct, we take our text block, and we set the text to whatever we get given in on the exposed onSpawn variable. Then when the button is clicked, we have this onClicked event, which is going to forward our own custom onClicked event that also sends through the index. So we make a new event dispatcher, call this onClicked as well. Maybe you want to name this like onClicked custom or onClicked with index or something along the lines. We're going to give that an input, new parameter. It's going to be an integer, and we'll just call that index and drag that in. So when we click on this button, we're just going to call out onClicked with our custom index so that we can send that through to whatever is listening. And the whole reason that we did that is so now in the dialog display, when we run a new dialog table, what we can do is we can create a new widget of type WBP custom button, which is just going to have the text for next. Index is just going to be 0 in this case, and we promote that to a variable, call that next button, just so that we have an easy reference to it, because we're going to be deleting it again. And remember how we make this text block in a vertical box? Well, we're going to be using that now, so make sure that our vertical box is set to being a variable, so that we can dynamically add to it. We add a child to it, we're going to be adding our new button. Now with next button, we can assign to onClicked, and we're going to be assigning whatever code is in here to run whenever we click on that button. So whenever we click on that button, we just want to get our dialog box and progress the dialog. Now, we also want to get our dialog box and assign something to that, because we have that dialog finished event dispatcher that we haven't been doing anything with yet. So let's get working on that. Connect it up at the end here as well. And when that dialog is finished, we want to get our next button, and we want to remove that from its parent so that it deletes itself. And then just to be sure, we also want to unbind all events from dialog finished. Generally, this shouldn't be an issue, but it's good to not accidentally bind to this twice when the next dialog pops up. So just making sure that everything is unbound the moment the dialog is finished, and then we will rebind when the next dialog pops up, to prevent any potential weirdness in stupid edge cases that I might not be thinking about right now. Now, let's go back into the designer and make sure that we have in our vertical box here a little bit of room to the top. If we set this dialog box to use a fill and we align it to the bottom, it's going to snap to the bottom of our vertical box, but whenever we add something new to it, so let's just manually add a custom button to it real quick, under it, you can see that it snaps up to make room for that new button. So we'll have room for a handful of buttons like this. And of course, if we go back to the event graph, after we add this child to the vertical box, we can set this to use different padding and stuff, however we like. What you can do is you can just add that custom button like that, and for some reason my keyboard is messing up. You can just add that custom button like that and just try to figure out what settings you like. So we can just align this to center instead, if we don't want it to go all the way from left to right, at which point you go back into your event graph, you cast this to a vertical box slot, set the horizontal alignment to being centered. So now when these get dynamically added, it's only aligned to the very center, which might look a little bit better for you. I don't mind it taking up the entire screen, so we're just going to keep it at that. Make it a little bit easier to click as well. So let's go back into our state tree. There's one more thing that we need to do now that we also are going to be interacting with some buttons, and that is go back into our STT create dialog display, because we need to set input mode to UI only for the get player controller. And we might as well set the widget to focus to our display widget that we just created. And then with the player controller, we also set mouse cursor, or set show mouse cursor to being true, because we're going to be clicking on stuff. And then on the very end here, what we do is we get our player controller and we set mouse cursor back to being false. And now we'll change this test dialog, which just runs this one dialog line that we manually set up custom. We're going to be changing this up a little bit, or well, let's just make a new task for it actually. State tree task blueprint base, STT, run dialog table. We have a onState enter, and we have a couple of variables. So first and foremost, we have our dialog box, which is going to be of type dialog display. So WBP dialog display, and that will be a input just like we did before, because we require a dialog display to literally do anything. And then we'll also have a dialog table, and that's going to just be a instance editable and exposed variable. It's going to be a data table, or again, if you're using like data assets for this, it was of course going to be like that data asset. We use our dialog box to run dialog table. It's the dialog table that we're going to run. I'm just going to hook up like that. And here we also then get the dialog box from our dialog display. So let's actually change this to dialog display for the name so that everything is clear. We have our dialog display, which holds our dialog box, which has the dialog finished event dispatcher on it. So we're going to assign to dialog finished. And when that dialog finishes, we want to finish this task. So that's how we're going to be moving from one dialog table to the next dialog table, to maybe a choice, to another dialog table, and be able to navigate this state tree. So if we change in the state tree our test dialog now to instead be replaced with a dialog table, we can take our DT dialog 1, it's going to be running this. Need to make sure that this is actually hooked up to the dialog display value, of course. But that should be everything there is to it. So now we can run into this thing, press the F key, it says just text, and it actually straight up doesn't work. Okay, let's see why. Do make sure to hook up the is not valid as well to get next dialog, otherwise things is of course not going to work whenever you don't have any sound. So now I have a face. Do you have a face? Faces are nice. And now when I click next, it's just going to keep going in a loop and in a loop and in a loop and in a loop. Because what it does is it finishes this state and goes back to root, which goes back into this state. So what we do instead is we set up a transition that when this state is completed, I'm just going to succeed to tree. And when a tree succeeds, it just stops running. It just deletes itself until it runs again, at which point it's going to be a new instance and everything will just be with a clean start. So you can see now if we go through this again, it just closes out and we'll be back. I need to do one more thing, apparently. I skipped over, and that is on create dialog display, the task that we have on the root. At the end, of course, we also need to set our input mode back to game only, because otherwise we're going to be in for a little bit of trouble because we won't be able to walk around anymore. But yeah, so now we can skip through this and we can pick up playing where we left off. So with this, if we now add in a second one of these, so I'll just copy this over, and instead of tree succeeded, this one is now going to be set to next state, and we'll just make a new dialog here, and this is going to be face red, and this is going to be Haiti McFaceface, which is horribly misspelled, and he's going to say, I hate faces, yours in particular, please die. So what it's going to do is going to go through this first bit of dialogue, then it's going to go to the next state, go through this dialogue, and then finish the tree. In practice, you wouldn't ever actually need to do this for the most part, because you can just put both of those dialogue characters into one data table. But if for any reason you have a more complex like picker as to what other state it goes into, maybe your dialogue is a little bit more dynamic that way, and after this bit of dialogue it can either go into the Haiti McHaste face of whatever I call it, or the Lovey McLove face, which sounds very not safe for YouTube, depending on some kind of like friendship stats, in which case you would have two transitions here and you could transition into either or, which is really where the power of state trees comes in, because the flexibility and the customizability of every individual state's entry and exit conditions really make this worthwhile. So let's set this to dialog 2 and run this so that we can see I have a face, do you have a face, faces are nice, and now we go, I hate faces, yours in particular, please die. which means that we effectively can tell an entire story. We can't make any choices just yet, which we'll get into with the next video, but with this, you can make like 90% of your like visual novel that you want to make or something like that. You can write out your entire story in the data tables now. And just to show you, we can copy over some of these data table rows. So let's just add 3 more rows here. Just going to copy this row as a whole into this one. There you go. And then we can also like copy this into there and this one into there. Can get rid of this one entirely because everything is now contained within this first dialogue. So at the end here, we are going to go back to tree succeed. And now both of these characters can have a conversation within the one like data table, right? So it goes from one to the other, changes the face, changes the name, without having to like look at another data table or anything like that. Next time we're going to go back in and set up our choices, which is going to be, well, the whole reason that we want to be able to make a dialogue tree, right? Is make choices and show different dialogue as a result. And a very big thank you to all my Patreons. You can see them on screen right now. If you want to help support the channel or get any of the project files in any of my tutorials, there's a link down below to the Patreon page to support me, or alternatively as a YouTube member. And of course, an extra massive thank you to my Cave Digger tier supporters, Sir J. Thomas, and my Cave Student tier supporters, Oiku and Earl Monsville Urno.